Welcome to this webinar on managing hazardous manual tasks. Over the next 80 minutes, I'm going to discuss with you not only ways how we as managers and supervisors can go about managing this particular workplace hazard, but also some background concepts that can help us all understand why these measures are necessary. For those who don't know Wood, we are a global leader in the delivery of project management, engineering, consulting, and technical services to energy and built environment customers, and operate in more than 60 countries. Wood delivers a comprehensive range of services to support our customers across the entire asset lifecycle. We are a business where hazardous manual tasks are a risk globally, and the consequence of this activity is certainly something we unfortunately see on a not too infrequent basis. But before I start speaking about managing hazardous manual tasks, I'm going to give a quick reminder on our legal requirements around these types of activities. In Australia, we all have duties under the state's work health and safety legislation to identify and manage workplace risks. Businesses in particular have quite specific duties under this legislation. Many of you viewing this presentation today will be involved in supporting your business to meet not only their duty of care, but that, as far as reasonably practicable, ensuring that workers or other persons are not exposed to health and safety risks at the workplace. This also includes providing safe systems of work, monitoring the health of their workers, as well as the conditions under which they work. Of particular importance, which I will cover in more detail later, is that businesses also have a duty to consult with workers. This collaboration has important benefits for everyone and has been particularly helpful when managing hazardous manual tasks at Wood. It has helped in not only identifying our particular hazardous tasks, but has also helped make sure that the control measures that were identified were practical and achievable in the workplace. But before I go into more detail on hazardous manual tasks, I'm going to start with a refresher of some basic concepts on workplace hazards. All our workplaces have hazards. From a human perspective, a hazard is anything that has the potential to cause harm to a person and can range from physical hazards and chemical hazards to biological, psychosocial, and ergonomic hazards. Most people tend to associate the word ergonomics with the office environment. However, it is much broader than that. It applies to all workplaces. Ergonomics is about the science of designing a job around a worker and not the worker around the job, and involves three key areas. 1. The organisational factors. 2. The cognitive factors, which are concerned with mental processes such as perception, mental workload, and decision-making. And 3. The physical factors. So when it comes to ergonomic hazards, it's these factors within the workplace environment that specifically results in harm to the musculoskeletal system that I'm talking about. As the name implies, the musculoskeletal system means anything that relates to or involves the muscles or skeleton. The other concept that you need to understand is risk. Risk is the possibility harm, death, injury, or illness might occur when exposed to a hazard. Part of the general duties of care for every Australian business is identifying the hazards present in work activities. They must then assess the risks that the hazards created. The business must then eliminate the risks, and if that is not possible, at least minimise them by following the hierarchy of controls. For those who may not have heard the expression before, the hierarchy of controls is a system of actions used to minimise or eliminate the risk from workplace hazards. They follow a hierarchy in order of decreasing effectiveness, from elimination and substitution to isolation, engineering and administrative controls, to personal protective equipment, which is the least effective of the control measures. But these crucial activities don't just end by applying the control measures, they must be maintained on an ongoing basis to make sure that they not only continue to reduce the risk from workplace hazards, but are working effectively and remain fit for purpose. Your regular reviews should identify not only that the control measures are still in place, but identify if any changes are needed as well. New hazards may well have arisen between reviews. This can be the result not only of organisational or process changes, which are certainly not uncommon from time to time, but also may be identified through your workforce consultations as needing to be addressed. From this, you can understand why risk management is not a static activity, but an ongoing, evolving process. There to help protect both your workers and the business. When it comes to hazardous manual tasks, the Model Work Health and Safety legislation introduced in 2011 not only requires businesses to identify and manage the risks of developing musculoskeletal disorders, but also provides quite specific guidance in relation to the controls which are required. The Model WHS laws has been implemented in the Australian Capital Territory, New South Wales, the Northern Territory, Queensland, South Australia, Tasmania, and the Commonwealth. I'll speak more about this later. But in short, they are in relation to managing the hazards which directly stress the body and can lead to an injury. For manual handling, the hazards are the posture, movements, forces and vibration in relation to the body. The duration and frequency of exposure to these hazards also has to be factored in, as well as managing the workplace environmental conditions, design and layout of the workplace, and ensuring safe systems of work. And it's not just businesses that have these quite specific requirements. There are duties too on designers, manufacturers, importers, and suppliers of plant or structures. A good resource to help understand your particular duties can be found in the Safe Work Australia Hazardous Manual Tasks Code of Practice. Based on the hierarchy of controls that I just mentioned, the best point to eliminate hazards is in the design and planning phase. The model legislation requires, if you design or manufacture plant or a structure, that you must eliminate or minimise the need for hazardous manual tasks to be carried out in connection with them. What this really means is that you design the task around the person and not the person around the task. The legislation also requires that you provide or obtain information if you import plant or structures. This information is crucial so you can advise your customers not only how to operate the plant or equipment safely, but also how to transport and maintain it safely as well. As a manufacturer or importer, you also need to consider how your product is packaged and delivered to workplaces to eliminate or minimise the risk of musculoskeletal disorders from handling that plant or equipment. Do you need to provide lifting aids or repackage it into something easier to handle, for example? All important points to consider. And there is more. The model legislation also requires those with specific leadership roles in businesses, such as directors and workers with influence over business decisions, to undertake due diligence. Workers also have specific duties in relation to work health and safety in workplaces. Due diligence involves directors and those with influence over business decisions taking steps to ensure that the business complies with the duties that I mentioned before. This means taking reasonable steps to ensure that your business has and uses appropriate resources and processes to manage your particular workplace risks, including those from hazardous manual tasks. A big part of due diligence is also making sure that you keep up to date with your knowledge and understanding of the health and safety matters that apply to your specific operation and industry. And this e-learning aims to provide some of this when it comes to discussing the management of hazardous manual tasks. So, what are hazardous manual tasks? To explain this, I need to go back a few steps. Manual tasks are involved to a lesser or greater extent in all job roles. Manual tasks cover a wide range of activities that involve using the body to move or hold an object, person, or animal. It varies from stacking shelves to sitting at a desk and using a computer to enter data. It's important to recognise that not all manual tasks are hazardous. However, as managers, to meet the legal requirements I've just spoken about, it's necessary that you can not only identify those tasks which are hazardous, but also make sure that appropriate control measures are put in place to protect the health and well-being of your workers. The Model Work Health and Safety regulations help us to do this. They define hazardous manual tasks as a task that requires a person to lift, lower, push, pull, carry, or otherwise move, hold or restrain any person, animal or thing that involves one or more of the following: repetitive or sustained force, high or sudden force, repetitive movement, sustained or awkward posture, or exposure to vibration. As I mentioned before, these hazards directly stress the body and can lead to an injury, and we will speak about them later. The musculoskeletal disorders that can occur because of these hazardous manual tasks are also defined in the legislation. They are an injury to or a disease of the musculoskeletal system, whether occurring suddenly or over time. It does not include an injury caused by crushing, entrapment, such as fractures and dislocations, or cutting resulting from the mechanical operation of plant. Injury from hazardous manual tasks is a significant cause of sickness absence across Australia. The Australian Institute of Health and Welfare Burden of Disease study reported in 2019 that musculoskeletal conditions were the third leading cause of disease burden in Australia after cancer and cardiovascular diseases. Back pain alone contributed to nearly a third of the musculoskeletal conditions. The report also documented that overall, 38% of the burden of disease was preventable, being due to modifiable risk factors, and that includes hazardous manual tasks. Safe Work Australia also reported in 2014 to 2015 that of the 107,355 serious workplace claims notified, 90% were related to injury and musculoskeletal disorders. 45% of these were a consequence of hazardous manual tasks costing an estimated $28 billion. In New South Wales, the 3 years to July 2016, there were 19,525 serious workers' compensation claims for musculoskeletal disorders, at an average cost of $32,744 each, and an average time loss at work of 17 weeks. While in Queensland, more than 40,000 musculoskeletal injury claims were lodged across all industry sectors, with an average cost of $7,059 per claim in the 2014 to 2015 period. As you can see, musculoskeletal injuries and disorders arising from hazardous manual tasks have an enormous impact. And it's not just our workers and the business that are affected, but our society as a whole. The impact and cost of musculoskeletal disorders are not only wide-ranging, but can also be long-term as well. When you consider the individual themselves, it involves not only the physical effects of the disorder, the potential reduction in quality of life and resultant absence from work with the associability and benefits that it can bring, but also the mental impacts from the pain and suffering experienced, which can not only affect them, but can also have an impact on their family too. And that's not even considering the financial consequences that can also occur. And the impacts don't just stop at the individual. It's also likely there will be a reduction in your overall workplace morale because of your workers seeing a colleague injured or unwell. This then cascades into affecting your business productivity, and it's not just these indirect costs that will affect you. You'll also have direct costs to your business, not only from any claim, but costs for covering the absent individual, raised premiums to cover the potential need for ongoing medical interventions to support the worker, as well as costs for aids or adjustments to support their rehabilitation and return to work. And that's assuming that they do return. I've managed to find some figures to demonstrate from New South Wales, which show that as a society between 2012 and 2015 in New South Wales, 148,727 workers were injured. 1,394 workers became permanently disabled, and 7 were tragically killed as a result of hazardous manual tasks. And I'm sure there will be a similar picture in other states. So, managing the risk of musculoskeletal disorders effectively has huge benefits for everyone. All of our businesses and industries are affected by hazardous manual tasks to some degree, but there are some types of work and some sectors that have an inherently higher risk of this. Some of the highest rates of musculoskeletal disorders are found in the healthcare and social assistance and manufacturing industries. At Wood, we are perhaps fortunate that we don't fall into these industries, but we are certainly not immune. Due to our large number of office workers, we still experience musculoskeletal disorders, especially from sitting and typing too long. Musculoskeletal disorders are one of the most common work-related injuries and diseases seen in Australia. Generally, an injury is something that has occurred by way of a sudden event or incident. Typically, there is immediate damage caused by a strenuous activity or unexpected movement, such as when loads, which are being handled, move or change position suddenly. In fact, hazardous manual tasks are the most common cause of injury in the Australian workplaces, accounting for 38% of all acute injuries in 2016 to 2017. A disease, on the other hand, is generally a condition of gradual onset, having developed over a reasonably extended period of time. This means there has been gradual wear and tear to joints, ligaments, muscles, and intervertebral discs caused by repeated or continuous use. An example of musculoskeletal disease is rotator cuff impingement syndrome. This shoulder condition typically develops gradually over time due to repetitive activities using the shoulder. The tendons become intermittently trapped and compressed during movement, resulting in the development of pain and inflammation. However, it's not always this simple when it comes to musculoskeletal disorders. Sometimes injuries can occur because of a combination of both cumulative as well as sudden damage. The cumulative damage may result in weakened body tissue, which may then be vulnerable to sudden injury at much lower forces than would typically cause an effect, and is an important cause of work-related injuries. Overall, the musculoskeletal disorders that you'll likely see in the workplace include sprains and strains to muscles, ligaments, and tendons; back injuries due to damage to the back's muscles, tendons, ligaments, joints, bones, as well as intervertebral discs; nerve injuries or compressions, such as seen in carpal tunnel syndrome; or the damage to blood vessels and muscles as a result of hand-arm vibration. In addition, soft tissue hernias, chronic pain, and bone and joint degeneration or arthritis involving the shoulders, elbow, wrist, hip, knee, ankle, and hands are also part of this group of disorders, and again, something that you'll likely also have to manage in your workers. I've spoken about the range of conditions you may encounter, but the one you'll most likely see is back pain. Just to reiterate, in Australia in 2016 to 2017, 38% of all the serious work-related claims involved the back, more than double that rate for any other part of the body. The back is not only the central support system for our entire skeleton, but protects our spinal cord as well. Our back is designed for both strength and flexibility, and has 3 natural curves to allow our weight to be distributed more evenly. Strong muscles in our back, legs, and abdominal core are needed to maintain good alignment. Muscles and ligaments help the spine to function in an upright position, and allows our trunk to assume a variety of positions when performing various activities. We also have a number of joints in our spine, which also adds to our flexibility. In fact, we have considerably more joints in our spine than in our arms and legs. But the effect of having these numerous joints is that our back is not designed to be a lifting device. When work areas and tasks are designed poorly or inadequately, it can put workers' body in positions that compromise the natural posture, and curvature places strain on the supporting muscles and ligaments. So, poor postures, such as bending and twisting, as well as awkward postures, fatigue our spinal muscles faster, and then forces our numerous small joints in our spine to carry weight they are not designed to carry. This leads to the cumulative wear and tear that I spoke about before, and increases the risk of the development of back pain because of the damage. Another important part of the spine that you need to consider are the intervertebral discs. They act as the shock absorbers of our spine. They normally allow a slight movement between our vertebrae and act to hold our spine together and maintain its alignment and stability. However, if there is too much movement because of poor postures and awkward positions, it places the discs under undue pressure, resulting in them tearing and the central contents escaping, pressing on nearby nerves and causing pain and reduced mobility. Studies have been undertaken to understand the effects that different types of movement have on our spine, particularly looking at the pressures these generate in the discs. What they have shown is that leaning and bending forwards increases the risk for injury to occur, and is why awkward postures such as this need to be managed in the workplace. However, before we can manage the hazardous manual tasks, we firstly need to identify those that have the potential to cause musculoskeletal disorders. This forms step 1 in the risk management process. The risk management process is a systematic process used to manage risks associated with hazardous manual tasks that have the potential to cause musculoskeletal disorders in the workplace, and this process must incorporate consultation with your workforce. The first step is to identify whether the manual task is hazardous or not, as mentioned before. For example, does the manual task involve forces, awkward postures, and exposure to vibration, etc.? The second step involves assessing the risks. For hazardous manual tasks, this means examining in detail risks associated with the task to assess the likelihood of the forces, movements, and postures giving rise to a musculoskeletal disorder. To help with this step, it's also important to consider what is the risk of musculoskeletal disorders relating to the hazardous manual task? What is the source of risk or what is causing the risk? Such as work area design and layout, systems of work, etc., that I will talk about later. This is then followed by the activities or steps that you need to perform to control the risks. Eliminating them is obviously the preferable option, but this may not be possible in all cases. So implementing the most effective control measures that are reasonably practicable in the circumstances, in accordance with the hierarchy of control measures that I mentioned earlier, is the next best option. Finally, you need to make sure that these measures remain effective over time. This means setting up a review process to ensure that they are working and protecting your workers as planned. As you can see, there are a few things to do when it comes to protecting your workers from hazardous manual tasks. The reason that tasks can become hazardous and lead to injury or damage arises is because of the interaction between the worker and the task that they are doing. How they perform the task, the tools, equipment, and objects they handle, as well as the physical environment that they are working in. When it comes to identifying these tasks, one of the best sources of information is through consultation with your workers. Get them to tell you the tasks that they find difficult, awkward, dangerous due to shifting loads, or cause discomfort. Doing this means that you have the potential to identify hazardous manual tasks and put corrective actions in place before they hurt someone. And don't just consult to find out about your current tasks. Consult early if you're going to buy or obtain new equipment, change processes, refurbish, renovate, or redesign existing workplaces, or carry out work in new environments. Though consultation is a requirement under the work health and safety legislation, it also makes good business sense. Your workers not only know their key demands, but often they are the ones most likely to come up with a practical, workable solution to manage the issue. So use their knowledge. Something that can also be helpful is getting your workers to complete a discomfort survey. Find out if they are experiencing any discomfort in their body when they are performing manual tasks, and if so, where that is in the body. Ask how long it lasts and what the level of discomfort or pain is at. Is it just noticeable, moderate, or unbearable? Also, identify if they are experiencing any other symptoms, such as swelling, pins and needles, stiffness, or numbness. All can point to activities that may be hazardous and that you may need to manage. At Wood, the use of safety observation cards and hazard cards that allow workers to report safety observations at their locations has also helped us identify hazardous activities in numerous work sites and has been a hugely beneficial means of flagging potentially hazardous activities before they have become a problem. Other good sources of useful information are your HR records. Look at the rate of your staff turnover. A high turnover usually indicates something is wrong. Also, consider the number of workers' compensation claims that you have in relation to workplace injuries and incidents resulting in musculoskeletal disorders. Also, look for trends, not only in your claims, but also in your incidents and injuries reporting. Trending will help you identify the manual tasks that should be reviewed as a priority. Using the hazard risk factors mentioned before in the model work health and safety legislation will help you identify those jobs that have more of those characteristics that make the task hazardous. Trends can also show if workers in a particular location are experiencing more incidents and injuries, which could indicate a problem with the design and layout of the job area or the way the work is carried out in that area. Information on hazardous manual tasks may also get flagged to you through industry alerts from trade associations, guidance from safety consultants or technical specialists, the unions, as well as from your local safety regulator, so look out for these too. Another good way of identifying hazardous manual tasks is to inspect your workplace regularly through observation. Simple observation can provide invaluable information, and really look and see how your workers perform their work. Check for improvisations that your workers have made to minimize or avoid discomfort. It could be stacking mats to make working at a bench easier, or using reams of paper to raise the height of computer screens to reduce neck strain. And while you're looking, identify equipment that looks difficult or awkward to use or does not work properly. What the state of housekeeping is like, as well as what practices are being followed, whether safe or unsafe. But particularly importantly, look at their postures and movements. I've already mentioned very briefly the hazards associated with hazardous manual tasks that can overload the body and result in injury and disease. Repetitive or sustained force, high or sudden force, repetitive movement, sustained or awkward posture, and exposure to vibration. But before going into more detail, there are 5 basic concepts that you need to understand: force, posture, repetition, vibration, and duration. Force, as defined by Safe Work Australia in their Code of Practice, is the amount of muscular effort required to perform a movement or task. Posture, on the other hand, is the way in which someone usually holds their shoulders, neck, and back, or is a particular position in which someone stands, sits, etc. An ideal posture is one where the body is in a neutral position, with the trunk and head are upright and forward-facing. The arms are by the side of the body. The forearms are either hanging straight or at right angles to the upper arm, and the hand is in the handshake position. This is the ideal. However, I won't pretend that it can at times be challenging to achieve this, particularly when the nature of the task involves working with equipment and in workspaces that did not have ergonomics in mind when they were designed or built. Sometimes you have to accept that you can't redesign a 1970s-built processing plant or offshore oil platform and have to look at other ways of reducing the musculoskeletal disorder risks to your workers. Vibration. Vibration, at its most basic, is the continuous series of small, fast movements of an object either forwards or backwards, as well as side to side, about a static point. These movements or oscillations can be regular or random. The subsequent vibration energy entering the body from the part of the body in contact with the object, which is vibrating, has the potential to cause damage. It's important to recognize that vibration is recognized as a hazard under many of the states' work health and safety legislation, as well as the Australian standards. Next is duration. The Safe Work Australia Hazardous Manual Tasks Code of Practice helps by defining what this means. The duration of a task is how long the task is carried out over a whole shift or continually at any time during the shift. The longer the task is performed, the more hazardous it is likely to be. Finally, repetitive movement is when the worker is using the same parts of the body to repeat similar movements over a period of time. Some examples of repetitive movement include painting, lifting goods from a conveyor belt and packing them in a carton. Now that I've spoken of these 5 concepts briefly, I'm going to talk about them in more details. I'm going to speak firstly of forces. Force is the amount of effort that our bodies must generate to lift objects, grip and use tools, or to move. Forceful muscular exertions overload the muscles, tendons, joints and discs, and can result in the development of the musculoskeletal injuries and diseases that I've already spoken about. The forces required to undertake activities in the workplace can be repetitive, where force is used repeatedly over a period of time to move or support an object, such as lifting and stacking goods, or can be sustained, where a force is continually applied to do something, such as pushing a trolley around. More force means more muscular effort, so a longer time is needed to recover between tasks. Generally, in repetitive and sustained work, there isn't the time for the muscles to fully recover, meaning that they fatigue faster. It takes more effort to perform the same task, and that's when injuries can then occur. Forces that are hazardous can also be high or sudden. High forces typically occur when exertion is required to undertake the task, such as lifting or lowering a heavy object. The risk occurs because of the intensity of the force needed. Forceful exertion usually involves the muscles of the back, arm or leg and places high stresses not only on them, but also their associated tendons, joints and ligaments. And it's not just the legs and the back that can be affected. High force can also equally apply to activities using the hands or fingers, such as using the pinch grip. If you think about it, it requires more force to lift and carry a box in this position than using the hands as a hook. Sudden force, on the other hand, occurs when jerky or unexpected movements occur when handling an item or load. Typical situations that this occurs in is when your workers are carrying unbalanced loads or are handling animals or people who suddenly resist. You can understand then why musculoskeletal disorders are so common in the health and social care services. At Wood, it has been trolley incidents where we've experienced the most serious musculoskeletal injuries as a result of difficulty either getting them to move or getting them to stop moving. However, that's not the only hazardous activity that involves high or sudden force. Throwing or catching loads, moving fence posts which suddenly give way, as well as lifting, carrying and lowering heavy loads have all contributed to our injury statistics and are examples that you could consider for your business. One particular question which you can ask your workers to help identify the risk of high force is whether they think that the task should be performed by more than one person, as it's physically very strenuous or difficult to do. Your discomfort survey as well may have flagged pain or significant discomfort after performing the task. And remember, use all those sources of information that I spoke about earlier to help you identify which tasks place your workers at risk. If you maintain the same body position for long periods of time, it too can cause discomfort and fatigue. As an example, think of standing. We consider it a natural body posture, and by itself should pose no particular health hazards. However, if you work for long periods in a standing position, you can get sore feet, general muscular fatigue, and low back pain. This can then be aggravated if the work area layout is poor, as well as if you have to undertake certain tasks, which means that you have to remain in a particular posture. Having an awkward or sustained posture in combination with those tired and fatigued muscles can lead to the development of musculoskeletal disorders. When parts of the body are in an uncomfortable or unnatural position, or postures are unbalanced or asymmetrical, that is, they are in an awkward posture. This means that stretching and compression of your tendons and nerves occur. Think of bending over a workbench or reaching behind the body, activities common in many workplaces. The longer this awkward body posture is used, the more likely you and your workers are to develop those musculoskeletal disorders. Sustained posture, on the other hand, is when part or all of the body is held in a fixed position and is the other hazardous posture that contributes to musculoskeletal disorders. As a guide, sustained means that the posture or force is held for more than 30 seconds at a time. A good example of sustained posture is having the arms raised to put up scaffolding, something that parts of our business do a lot in Wood. To do this requires controlled movement of the arms. The muscles in the shoulder and neck contract and stay contracted for as long as the arms are raised holding the scaffold poles. This prolonged muscular contraction then squeezes the blood vessels, which restricts the flow of blood all the way down to the working muscles of the hand. However, this is where the blood is needed the most. Two things then happen. The neck or shoulder muscles become overtired, even though there is little or no movement. At the same time, the reduced blood supply to the rest of the arm accelerates fatigue in the muscles that are moving and gripping the scaffold, making them more prone to injury. From these scenarios, you can understand why posture is another of the characteristics that can make manual tasks hazardous. The next of the hazard or risk factors associated with hazardous manual tasks that I'm going to speak about is vibration. There are two main forms of this type of energy which can enter the body, and both have the potential to cause damage: hand-arm vibration and whole-body vibration. Hand-arm vibration is the vibrating energy transmitted to your hands and arms. This can occur if you're directly holding a handheld tool, such as a needle gun, or when you hold hand-guided machinery, such as a lawnmower. Vibration can also be transmitted when you use hand-fed machinery, such as when you guide timber through a cutting saw. As you can see, there are lots of different ways in the workplace that this type of energy can be transferred to you. However, simply being exposed to vibration does not necessarily mean it's harmful and that you are at risk. There are three major contributory factors which make vibrations hazardous: the amount of time that you're exposed to the vibration, the frequency of the vibration, that is the rate at which the surface or tool vibrates, and the amplitude or size of the vibration. Regular exposure to hand-arm vibration can result in a range of injuries, which are known collectively as hand-arm vibration syndrome, or HAVS. This all-encompassing term is used to describe the various signs and symptoms that can occur from hazardous vibration exposure. The vibration energy can result in disrupted blood supply to the hand and forearm. You may have heard of the term white finger, where you get blanching of the fingers. This is the effect of the disrupted blood supply and is a well-recognised sign and symptom of HAVS. Other signs and symptoms of this syndrome include tingling and numbness of the hand and forearm due to damage to the nerves, as well as difficulties in fine motor skills, such as doing up your buttons due to damage to the tendon, joints, bones and muscles. Exposure to vibration can also result in pain and stiffness in the joints of your hand and wrist, loss of grip strength, as well as loss of sensitivity to temperature and touch, and can also be associated with the development of other conditions, such as carpal tunnel syndrome as well. Something else that you should be aware of is that HAVS is a progressive condition if you continue to be exposed to vibration. Once vibration has caused damage, its effects are generally permanent and irreversible, and can only worsen if you continue to be exposed to hazardous levels of vibration. Also, depending on the level of exposure, it can take at least 2 years before any evidence of damage is noted. But it's important to recognise that first and foremost, HAVS is totally preventable. It's up to us as managers and supervisors to ensure that the risks associated with hand-arm vibration are recognised early and appropriate control measures put in place. In 2010, the National Hazard Exposure Worker Surveillance Survey reported that approximately 1/4 of Australian workers were exposed to vibration in the workplace, with approximately 40% exposed for up to 1/4 of their work time. This means that you are likely to have vibration risks in your workplace which you may not have identified. For many years, this particular hazard has been under-recognised, and especially when it comes to considering the risks from whole-body vibration. Whole-body vibration is the vibration and shock you can feel when sitting or standing on a vehicle or machine, particularly when it's travelling over uneven surfaces. You can also experience it when you work near powerful machinery, such as a rock crusher. The effects of whole-body vibration are complex and are also known to be influenced by posture at the time that the vibration is transmitted. Exposure to whole-body vibration at low levels is unlikely on its own to cause musculoskeletal injury, but it can aggravate pre-existing injuries, which may then cause pain and reduce performance. But we're really only just starting to understand the impact that this has on our bodies. There is some research evidence that whole-body vibration can cause fatigue, which is another workplace hazard and can contribute to workplace incidents. There is also some evidence that workers who are exposed to whole-body vibration and noise are more likely to experience hearing loss than those exposed to the same level of noise alone. However, the reason as to how this may happen is unknown. But as you can see, the effects from vibration can be wide-ranging. As more research is done, we may get better at understanding the true extent of vibration's hazardous nature. So it's a case of watch this space as our knowledge and understanding develop. The Manufacturer's Handbook is a good source of information, so as part of your assessment, check and see if they warn of vibration risks both for hand-arm as well as whole-body vibration. If you identify that vibration does pose a potential risk, then I would suggest using the Safe Work Australia guidance materials to help in your further assessment of this particular risk. Duration is another of the hazard or risk factors associated with hazardous manual tasks that you need to understand. If you have assessed a task as involving postures, movements, or forces that are also repetitive or sustained, you should consider the duration of the task. The longer the task is performed, the more hazardous it is likely to be. Hazardous manual tasks that continue over a long period of time or are repeated throughout the workday increase the risk of developing musculoskeletal disorders. It is something that I've spoken about before. At Wood, to minimise our risks from this, we regularly rotate duties. If you're uncertain what long duration means, it's tasks that are performed for more than a total of 2 hours over a whole shift or for more than 30 minutes continuously at a time. So if your answer is yes to any of these, then the task you're assessing involves risk which must be controlled. While these durations are provided as a guide only, it's important that a risk management approach be applied to all hazardous manual tasks, which takes into account the task to be performed and the needs of the individuals required to perform it. This will help you implement rotation schedules, which will ensure tasks requiring shorter durations of performance will be appropriately managed. Finally, I'm going to speak about repetitive movements. Repetitive movements are particularly hazardous when they involve the same joints and muscle groups over and over, doing the same motion too often, too quickly, and for too long. As a guide, take repetitive to mean that the movement or force is performed more than twice per minute. Something to be aware of is that tasks requiring repetitive movements also involve other risk factors for musculoskeletal disorders, such as sustained body position and force as well. This is because in order to perform the task, the body has to be maintained in a fixed position to exert force to support the repetitive movements. Like forceful movements, repetitive movements can also be very tiring, as workers can't fully recover in the short periods of time between the movements. Eventually, it takes more effort to perform the same movement. When the work activity continues despite the fatigue, that's when injuries can occur. Pace of work is something that you need to seriously think about. Pace also has other impacts. When workers have no control over the timing and speed of work because of external factors, like assembly line speed or quota systems, then stress levels can also increase. And this can also worsen the situation, as higher stress levels lead to muscle tension and fatigue, and again, an increased risk for musculoskeletal disorders. In fact, a whole vicious cycle. But I'll speak more on the psychological factors and how they influence musculoskeletal disorders later. Repetitive movement disorders are part of the musculoskeletal disorders that I've mentioned before. They can occur either because of work activities or our daily activities. Something that you should be aware of is that if due to daily activities, they do have the potential to be aggravated by work, a point to keep in mind. Some repetitive movement disorders include such conditions as carpal tunnel syndrome, bursitis, tendinitis, epicondylitis, ganglion cysts, tenosynovitis, as well as trigger finger. They are caused, as their name implies, by too many uninterrupted repetitions of an activity or motion in association with unnatural or awkward motions, such as twisting the arm, overexertion, incorrect posture, or muscle fatigue. Repetitive movement disorders most commonly occur in the hands, wrists, elbows, and shoulders, but they do sometimes happen in other parts of the body as well. Typical symptoms include pain, tingling, numbness, visible swelling or redness of the affected area, and loss of flexibility and strength. These disorders often go through a series of stages as they develop. This means that if you identify the condition early and put measures in place to address the causative factors, you can prevent the development of longer-term conditions and potential disability. The earlier that workers recognize the symptoms and report them, the quicker you can respond to them. Asking about discomfort and pain during worker consultations or the discomfort surveys I mentioned before can be invaluable. And it's not just discomfort from repetitive movements that you may identify. Issues related to posture may also get flagged. Now that I've discussed in depth the hazards and risk factors associated with hazardous manual tasks and other factors to consider where you can identify them in your workplace, as well as spoken about some of the disorders that can arise from them, the next step in the risk management process is assessing the risk. Performing a risk assessment as part of your risk management process, as you know, involves considering what could happen if your workers were exposed to hazardous manual tasks, as well as considering the likelihood of the forces, movements, postures, and vibration giving rise to a musculoskeletal disorder. It helps you with the 4 W's, the which, where, why, and what. Which postures, movements, and forces of the tasks that your workers perform pose a risk? Where or when during the task the risk occurs? Why are those risks occurring? And what needs to be done to fix the problem and reduce the risk to your workers? It also helps to determine which of your workers are at risk of exposure, whether existing controls are effective, as well as how urgently actions need to be taken to address the hazardous manual task. Tools and worksheets can be especially helpful during this part of the assessment. They can help you highlight the source of the risk, identify how the job may be modified to reduce the risk of injury to make it easier to do. It also helps you to prioritise your actions. The Safe Work Australia Hazardous Manual Tasks Risk Assessment and Risk Control Worksheet, which you can find on their website, can assist you to go through this process, as well as help document your findings. There are also other risk assessment tools available from other work health and safety regulators, such as WorkCover Queensland's Hazardous Manual Tasks Risk Management Worksheet. Worksheets can be downloaded freely from your state regulators' websites, or can be used to help design your own assessment checklist. But before you start filling in any tools or worksheets, you need to work out who you will involve in undertaking the risk assessment. From experience, it's best to make up a small work team, if you have the luxury to be able to do this. The best combination is having one of the work team who do the task, along with yourself as manager or supervisor, and your health and safety representative. However, this may not be possible in all workplaces, and sometimes you may also require calling in expert advice for help. However, whoever you choose should be competent to complete the risk assessment and have a good working knowledge of the process. Once you've identified whether the manual task is hazardous or not, it's time to assess the hazardous manual task risks that can cause musculoskeletal disorders. As part of the risk assessment process, you need to ask, does the task involve repetitive or sustained movements, postures, or forces? Does the task involve high or sudden force? Is there hand, arm, or whole body vibration? What is the duration of the task? Next, consider what is the source of risk or the root cause of issue. Is it related to work area design and layout, systems of work, nature, size, weight, and number of persons, animals, or things handled? Work environment. By considering what the sources of risk are, or what the root causes of issues are, it will help you and the workplace to determine appropriate control measures needed to reduce musculoskeletal disorders. I will go through each of the sources of risk in more details later. When assessing risks associated with hazardous manual tasks, sometimes it can be helpful to include photographs or diagrams to illustrate the tasks, and especially when you're describing the area where the manual task is performed. Note which body parts are likely to be at risk of injury, as well as the number of personnel required to complete the task. And look at the whole task. There's no point in just looking at one isolated aspect, but break it down into its multiple stages as an end-to-end process. That way, you are more likely to pick up when or where in the process there is risk actually occurring and target that. For example, it could mean that you identify that a load being handled was too bulky in the first place and should have been moved by different means. Something certainly it would, we've learnt to do from previous experience. I'll now talk about the sources of risk. When conducting a risk assessment, it's important to think about the sources of any risks present in the task. These are the things you may be able to change to eliminate or reduce the likelihood of a musculoskeletal disorder. Some sources of risk to consider are the work area design and layout, the nature, size, weight, or number of things to be handled when performing the task, the systems of work, and the environment in which the task is carried out. When it comes to work area and design, where you do have control and influence, look at the positioning and relationship of different elements in the work area to each other. Ask yourself, can your workers easily reach for items? Do they have to negotiate workbenches, fittings, or furnishings? Do they have to carry objects long distances or work in awkward positions? So, can the need for these activities be eliminated, changed, or managed better by applying the hierarchy of controls? If you can't, can you then introduce a better designed work area that eliminates or reduces those hazardous manual tasks, particularly reaching, bending, and twisting? Certainly all factors to consider. At Wood, managing workstation design has been particularly important due to our large numbers of agile personnel. With the rise of the internet and portable technology more and more, workers are able to work in different multiple and various locations. Working no longer just means sitting at a desk in the office. However, though there are obvious benefits from this flexibility, there are risks of practices that could be detrimental to both health and productivity. To address this, Wood has a global e-learning program to provide guidance and training not only in how to correctly set up workstations in a range of working environments, from the office to hot desking to the home office environment, to ensuring that correct postures and positions are attained. We've also provided some additional guidance on the importance of alternating positions and keeping moving, preventing eye strain, and getting breaks away from the workstation. I mentioned before about the height-adjustable desks in the office, but getting working heights, including bench heights, right is an important part of reducing the risks of developing musculoskeletal disorders too. A big part of managing the design and layout of the work area is deciding what work position the activity is actually best carried out in. This could mean that either sitting or standing is the most appropriate. When it comes to the nature, size, weight, or number of things to be handled as a source of risk, there are several focus areas, including loads and tools. The risk of musculoskeletal disorders increases, particularly during lifting, carrying, pushing, and pulling of loads. Loads pose a risk to your workers due to the amount of muscular effort needed to handle them, particularly if they are too heavy, too large, difficult to grasp, unstable or unbalanced, difficult to reach, or involve handling people or animals. An important take-home message is, reduce the need to handle loads as much as you can, and if you can't, then lifting technique training should not be used as your only way of managing this risk. In fact, there is considerable evidence from global studies that this really is not of much benefit, as basically, you haven't actually removed the risk factors causing the problem in the first place. The problem is still there. Speaking of guidance, a highly recommended document to help is the 2012 WorkSafe Victoria Handling Large, Bulky or Awkward Items Guide. This provides lots of practical advice on the best ways of changing the nature, size, weight, or number of items handled by your workers to reduce the risk of musculoskeletal disorders. It follows the hierarchy of controls and starts off by asking that all-important question: do you need to handle the item in the first place? Tools, and tool purchasing and maintenance in particular, are an area where there is a lot of focus in parts of wood, especially where we are involved in maintenance work. A positive purchasing policy is in place to not only identify as far as possible low-vibration tools, but these tools are also independently tested to confirm this, colour-coded according to their vibration risks, tagged with the maximum length of recommended daily usage times, as well as their decibel noise levels. We have built a strong relationship with our suppliers to ensure that they provide the most appropriate ergonomically designed tools. This ensures that we keep the weight of the tools down as far as possible, as well as ensuring that the handle orientation does not place the wrist in awkward positions by having tools that can be held using both hands. Handle design can be tricky, as hand sizes can obviously vary, though we usually manage this by offering several alternative tools for the same job. Along with this, we have linked maintenance programs so that tools are recalled and reviewed on a regular basis, as well as when issues are reported with them. Strict adherence to the duration of tool use is also followed, with various means of recording usage times used, results reviewed weekly, and corrective actions, including corrective conversations, had as necessary. Our aim is to keep hand-arm vibration exposure as low as reasonably practicable. Other sources of risk that your risk assessment may have raised is the way that you organise your work. This is also known as systems of work and can be another source of risk, especially when it comes to hazardous manual tasks. I haven't spoken very much about the psychological risk factors associated with undertaking manual tasks, as I've emphasised the physical ones so far. But the psychological ones are no less important. You probably think of psychological or psychosocial hazards, as they are also sometimes called, more in the context of workplace stress. But they have been repeatedly shown to influence hazardous manual tasks, as well as being linked to the development of musculoskeletal disorders as well. Psychosocial hazards, as defined by Safe Work Australia, are factors in the design or management of work. Research by Wendy McDonald and Owen Evans from La Trobe University as far back as 2006 concluded that workplace musculoskeletal disorders arose due to these aspects of work. They demonstrated that physical and mental fatigue and strain arising from the design and management of work triggered a response in the body that led to the development of increased muscle tension, which then affected the function of muscles, nerves, and blood vessels, resulting in the increased risk of injury and disease. So, what are these psychosocial work factors that are the source of this risk? Demands of the job feature highly. When job demands are high due to significant time pressures or having too much to do, workers have to sustain a high level of physical, mental, or emotion effort to do the job, which can then lead to fatigue as well as strain. At Wood, we run 24/7 shift work operations. This places additional demands on our workers, increasing the potential risk of fatigue, as does the fact that we have workers who work around some fairly unpleasant hazardous waste and chemicals on a not infrequent basis, placing them at considerable mental strain as well. These activities increase our business risk of our workers developing musculoskeletal disorders and could equally apply to yours. I should also add that low job demand roles due to their monotonous nature also increase the risk. It's not just high demands that are hazardous. Other psychosocial risk factors that you should consider include your resources for coping with work demands. Poor levels of supervision, poor team organisation and solidarity, as well as lack of processes for dealing with conflicts all increase your risk. Staffing levels, in addition to the right skills mix and effective shift arrangements, are other things that you need to consider when evaluating your systems of work. More information on the different sources of risk can be obtained from the Safe Work Australia Hazardous Manual Tasks Code of Practice. But as you can see, there's lots to think about when it comes to considering your business's particular psychosocial hazards. And it's not just the job design and job management hazards that you need to consider when identifying and managing your sources of risk. Individual features that your workers bring to the workplace, such as their skill levels and experience, physical characteristics, as well as work conditioning, may all increase the risk too. And this links into the diverse workplaces that we work in. Hot, cold, humid, windy, and wet environments can all pose their own unique risks that can increase the risk of developing musculoskeletal disorders when undertaking hazardous manual tasks, especially when workers are exposed to these environments on a regular basis. But you also need to consider the presence of obstructions in the work environment caused by poor housekeeping, which can make the task more difficult, as well as slippery or uneven floors and variable lighting levels. Too much light can lead to glare, and your workers adopting awkward postures to avoid it, while too little can be just as bad for the same reason. But in this instance, sustained or awkward postures are used to improve their vision. Having assessed all of these factors should mean that you have identified 3 of your 4 Ws. Which of the characteristics of hazardous manual tasks are present? Where or when in the process they are present, as well as why they are occurring, that is, the sources of risk that I've just discussed. The next important stage to complete the 4 Ws is to what. What needs to be done to fix the problem and reduce the risk of hazardous manual tasks to our workers? What means following the hierarchy of controls that I mentioned at the start of this e-learning. This is driven by the Work Health and Safety Regulations, which actually states that we must work our way through this hierarchy to identify the best control in the circumstances. And this may well mean that we need more than one of the different types of control measures to manage the particular risk. The most effective way of managing your hazardous manual tasks is to eliminate them in the first place. As I mentioned before, getting in at the planning and design stage has huge benefits if you can design out the problem or source of risk by way of automating the process. Even if that's not possible, designing your workplace so you can deliver goods directly to the point that they are used can also eliminate the need for a large amount of manual handling. This is something that we have tried hard to achieve at Wood so far as is reasonably practicable. We use forklift trucks at our onshore sites and fabrication shops to eliminate the hazardous manual task risks. However, as a word of caution, they do bring with them their own set of hazards, which you need to address if you are going to use them. This elimination is the highest, or level 1 control. I spoke earlier about our positive purchasing policy at Wood, as when you are unable to eliminate a risk, the next level of control is substituting the hazard for something that gives a lesser risk. When it comes to vibration, we use low vibrating tools as far as is reasonably practicable. In addition, where we can, we also use hands-free cutting tools such as clamshell cutters for heavy pipe work or chain-mounted reciprocating saws. But this is not the only type of substitution that you could consider. Making loads smaller, lighter, and less bulky all go towards reducing your hazardous manual task risks, as can changing your workplace layout. Isolating the hazard from the person at risk of exposure is another level 2 control measure that you could consider. This can include such things as providing fully independent seating on mobile plant to reduce the risks from whole body vibration, to appropriate guarding on machinery to remotely operating mechanical lifting equipment. Engineering controls are also used to manage hazardous manual task risks. This includes things such as mechanical lifting aids. A wide range of different aids are available, and depending on your operation can range from overhead and gantry cranes to vacuum-operated lifting devices to glass panel lifters and height-adjustable office equipment. If you do use tools and equipment, remember to use the most ergonomically suitable tool where possible, and make sure that you have an inspection and maintenance program set up as well. It will be challenging in having suitable equipment if they don't continue to operate and function as they were intended, as you are just introducing another risk, when the actual aim is to reduce your hazardous risks. Make sure that the equipment is the right equipment for the load and the work being done. Checking the weight lift limits is important. Make sure as well that the equipment is easy to use, is adjustable to suit different users, and is suitable for the environment you are using it in. At Wood, where we have a large office-based population, we have started to introduce height-adjustable workstations to reduce the postural issues that can happen, particularly for individuals who spend extended periods at their desk. I should also add that we are also introducing reminders as well for people to get up and move, and not stay seated, which, though a lesser level of control, when it comes to the hierarchy, also has benefits in managing our workstation hazardous posture risks. Other Level 2 controls that Wood have implemented include providing shelters for our workers to protect them from heat or cold, regularly monitoring lighting levels in our work sites and fab shops, providing appropriate mobile lighting. There are many other measures that you can use to reduce the risk from environmental factors that may cause musculoskeletal injuries. Further information on the work environment can be found in the Safe Work Australia Code of Practice, Managing the Work Environment and Facilities. If there is a remaining risk, it must be minimised so far as is reasonably practicable with administrative controls and/or personal protective equipment. Neither of these controls the hazard at the source, rather are reliant on human behaviour and require effective supervision to reduce the risk from hazardous manual tasks. These measures should only be used when there are no other reasonably practicable higher-level control measures available, or used to supplement higher-level control measures. Level 3 controls include systems such as managing your job rotations to minimise time spent undertaking hazardous manual tasks, arranging your workflows to avoid doing hazardous activities overnight or at the end of shifts, developing procedures and undertaking training so your workers know how to operate equipment correctly. Although job rotations and appropriate training may be listed as Level 3 controls according to Safe Work Australia Hazardous Manual Task Code of Practice, these are still important systems of work to supplement higher-level controls. For example, if a new ceiling hoist is purchased, then appropriate training on how to operate this equipment correctly is extremely important. And speaking of training, I know I mentioned it before, but I like to emphasise that the basic lifting technique training of bend your knees and keep your back straight is not in isolation suitable to control the risks associated with hazardous manual tasks and should not be used as the sole way of controlling the risk of injuries. Instead, your workplace should be providing training on how to identify hazardous manual tasks, how to identify sources of risk associated with the task, and how to prevent musculoskeletal disorders in the workplace. Finally, in addition, personal protective equipment may also be considered to minimise risk, such as non-slip protective footwear, as non-slip protective footwear may reduce slips, trips and falls to reduce musculoskeletal disorders in the workplace. However, it is always important to use personal protective equipment in addition to other higher-level controls, as personal protective equipment is one of the least effective control measures and forms the Level 4 controls, according to Safe Work Australia Hazardous Manual Task Code of Practice. I've mentioned it before, but you cannot consult with your workers enough if you want to address and embed the necessary changes to eliminate or at least minimise the risks associated with your hazardous manual tasks. Talk with them and get them to help identify the appropriate control measures. Something else which can be helpful is having trial periods for new equipment. That certainly was helpful at Wood when evaluating appropriate tools for reducing our vibration risks. Ask your workers to give their feedback before making wholesale and permanent changes, and always communicate why you are changing. When you are thinking of the most effective control measures, you should always focus on the ones that change the source of your risks. They are the ones that will get to the root of the problem. So change the design or layout of the work areas, change the system of work, change the work environment, and change the nature, size, weight, or number of items handled, as indicated by your risk assessment, to effectively reduce or eliminate your risk of musculoskeletal disorders. I also just want to emphasise, before purchasing equipment like tools, workstations, machinery and vehicles, make sure you identify hazards and any control measures required. You should always check whether the item has been designed so it can be used safely and best matches the needs of your workers. Where possible, you should consult your workers to ensure that you have a clear understanding of the tasks the workers are performing and hazards and risks to be eliminated. Talk to designers and engineers so consideration can be given to the design implications on the manual task performed. Review information given to you by the designer, manufacturer, importer or supplier about the features of the plant or structure to either eliminate or minimise the need for hazardous manual tasks. Trial before you buy to ensure the equipment is suitable for the task and layout of the workplace, etc. This is something that we quite commonly do at Wood when it comes to managing our vibration risks in particular. We get several different brands of the same hand tool with similar vibration magnitudes and get the workforce to trial to identify those that are the easiest and most comfortable to use. Developing a plan to manage and address your hazardous manual tasks takes time, dedication, and commitment. But when designed for your particular organisation, can bring significant benefits to your workers, reducing the risk of them developing musculoskeletal disorders. And you don't have to do it all at once. Putting in temporary short-term measures to manage an initial issue can allow you the time to come up with the long-term solution that you need. However, to bring the long-term benefits that you want, the control measures that you've identified do need to be embedded successfully. I've mentioned earlier about using trials for equipment, but it's not just equipment that you can trial. Other solutions, such as changing work layout or shift arrangements, can also be trialled to allow your workers the chance to determine their benefit before the solution is made permanent. And communicate. I know I've mentioned it before, but I can't repeat it enough. Always communicate the reasons for the change to your workers and bring them with you as you make any changes. Write down your procedures so that workers not only clearly understand their responsibilities, but the operating processes as well. And make sure that you have a maintenance program set up for any plant or equipment. Lack of adequate maintenance can be a common reason for control measure failures. I know I'm repeating myself, but sharing what works and what doesn't can help us all. And finally, review your control measures to not only ensure they are appropriate and effective, but that they also don't need to be amended. Control measures must be maintained so they remain fit for purpose, suitable for the nature and duration of the work, and be installed, set up and used correctly. If the control measure is not working effectively, it must be revised to ensure it is effective in controlling the risk. At Wood, a range of measures are used, including regular workplace inspections, safety audits, consulting with the workforce of any concerns, as well as reviewing all incident investigations to assist in monitoring how good our control measures and risk assessments really are. And this is not just a one-off check or event. but part of a continuous, ongoing monitoring program. Developing a plan to manage and address your hazardous manual tasks takes time, dedication, and commitment. But when designed for your particular organisation, can bring significant benefits to your workers, reducing the risk of them developing musculoskeletal disorders. And you don't have to do it all at once. Putting in temporary short-term measures to manage an initial issue can allow you the time to come up with the long-term solution that you need. However, to bring the long-term benefits that you want, the control measures that you've identified do need to be embedded successfully. I've mentioned earlier about using trials for equipment, but it's not just equipment that you can trial. Other solutions, such as changing work layout or shift arrangements, can also be trialed to allow your workers the chance to determine their benefit before the solution is made permanent. And communicate. I know I've mentioned it before, but I can't repeat it enough. Always communicate the reasons for the change to your workers and bring them with you as you make any changes. Write down your procedures so that workers not only clearly understand their responsibilities, but the operating processes as well. And make sure that you have a maintenance program set up for any plant or equipment. Lack of adequate maintenance can be a common reason for control measure failures. I know I'm repeating myself, but sharing what works and what doesn't can help us all. By effectively embedding and implementing the measures discussed in this e-learning, we can address the risks of musculoskeletal disorders that we all face in our organisations and align with the national target. That is, by 2022, there will be a decline of at least 30% in the incidence rate of serious musculoskeletal injuries and illnesses. But we can only do this by prioritising the musculoskeletal risks that we face, systematically eliminating and reducing them, and working together to share our learnings and improve our work health and safety practices. Hazardous manual tasks can be managed. It's under our control to prevent them.